Я прошу тоже из зала, в зал пригласить наших участников. Вы можете вот здесь тоже сесть ближе, чтобы удобно было. Как вам удобно? Хорошо. Спикеры готовы, все на месте. Ну, я думаю, выступление Алуи, она нам пришлет, тоже мы разместим эти материалы, и они будут доступны всем.
Now I would like to give the word to Mr. Bikmurodov from Uzbekistan, who will present an experience of Uzbekistan and his ideas about the regional cooperation and think tanks interaction. Hello, dear friends, dear partners. First of all, I would like to thank our friends from Argo for inviting me. For me, it's a great honor to participate in this forum, and especially to present to you as part of such a experienced expert group. About 12th of November, we had a brainstorm forum, for Central Asia, thinking about discussing, the perspective for the cooperation between think tanks, and as a result, we developed several proposals to increase and improve cooperation. And this forum in Almaty demonstrates high desire to have a more tighter cooperation between the institutes of civil society and think tanks of our region. As of today, in Uzbekistan, we have more than 50 analytical centers, and most of them are affiliated with state institutions. And since till recently, the brain centers were considered to be scientific institutes which were part of the state structures and just perform studies on the basis of the state-funded projects. And the activity of independent analytical like think tanks or centers were not even possible to imagine. We know that independent expertise cannot exist in the environment of the unacceptability of pluralism of opinions. But during recent years, we have independent analytical centers occurring in Uzbekistan, and now their growth is quite evident, and they're very active in forming the public opinion, and policies. And modern Uzbekistan demonstrates readiness to support alternative views, showing openness to political dialogue. At certain stages of history, there is a great changes. So Uzbekistan is living through such changes of expedited reforms involving all the court system, economic system, social system, security, external politics, and hundreds of laws were adopted during recent years and amendments, thousands of the sublegal documents, and it happened so that 5 to 10 presidential orders were signed on a reorganization of different spheres of life. And the development of analytics in the country in such conditions is not a priority task or goal. It's a very urgent thing, So now our government is based on the following approaches. The first thing is the wide involvement of academics community, which leading universities of the country, maximum utilization of existing analytical potential of the state institutions, which, as I said, more of 30 of them existing right now in the country, and the potential of non-government brain centers and the civil society institutions to have inclusiveness of the decision-making process, and utilization of ready analytical products of national and international institutions in order to provide for the high standards and modern trends. And with such conditions, socialist movement is an important liaison between the government and non-government sectors, and we present on a regular basis results of our studies with participation of the government institutions and parliamentaries. Besides, upon the request of analytical institutions, we provide necessary statistics to them and data, because not always this information is not always readily available, and we have to understand that people, decision-making specialists, or people, they have the excess data, excess information, which forms a demand for more structurized data. So beginning from January of next year, we will start with interesting sort of work as the quarterly publication of the results of the studies of think tanks on the basis of socio-economic development of the country. And regularly we will distribute this information to all parliamentaries, heads of the territorial administration. So this approach will allow decision-making specialists always have the basis of ideas with alternative opinions. So, dear participants of the forum, so strengthening of cooperation of the leaders, between the leaders of the Central Asia, creates unique environment for interaction of analytical society. So this process of connectivity process form new agendas, and development of long-term strategies and concept of development of different sectors, regional development, requires high-quality expert escort. Use of potential and involvement of think tanks in Central Asia. So it's important to create mechanisms of benefits of different initiatives, regional and research regional research projects. Also, we need existence of a platform, uniform platform, in order to provide effective communication for discussion. And also thinking about institutional structure for the think tanks of Central Asia. So we vocalized this idea recently to create this brand as intellectual network of think tanks or brain centers, not just another institution, but like a brand under which we can unite our efforts and create content and our products. And so we are for creation of the uniform electronic catalog with important results of studies on national and international languages, internationally accepted languages, because sometimes it's very necessary to use to have like the some results of studies in English, because sometimes very important studies are not available in English. So we think that important results should be published or in English. Also, we think about mechanisms of co-funding at the regional level. Of course, we have to think separate. Each country has to think separately, independently, how to develop analytical potential. But we also have to think on finding regional approach in development of the analytical institutions, because political connectivity is important. Political solutions should have good expert support, not before the high-level meetings, but on a regular basis, in order to create such a mechanism when we ourselves initiate some changes. Also, we received a support from our partners on our proposal to create a forum, such a union forum of civil societies of Central Asia. And I think together with you, together we can create such a union where we will develop the uniform sort of position of the region on different subject matters. And I think that discussion of these issues, these subject matters and proposals and opinion exchange will lead to fruitful cooperation, not between the state institutions or government institutions, but also civil societies. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much for your recommendations, for your review, and the initiatives which you are leading in terms of regional initiatives of connectivity. Tomorrow there will be a two-day discussion on how we can develop regional cooperation, and I think that your recommendations will be considered and discussed. And I think, hopefully, yes, because you already started this work, and just recently our colleagues came back from Uzbekistan, where we participated in the forum you mentioned. Thank you very much. Now, Elmira Nagaybayeva is through Zoom, connected through Zoom. It's the experience of Kyrgyzstan, head of the think tank Polis Asia. Mira, your floor is yours. Good day. We can see you. We can see you. We can hear you. It's any presentation before lunch. It's always a challenge, but we are used to challenges. Thank you very much for inviting me. Welcome to Iran Policy think tank. We have some exclusive experience because we are 20 years, we'll have 20-year anniversary in May. So the core of our independence center is the team which left a state analytical center or government-owned analytical center. And I would like to say that during this 20 years, I see how the development of think tanks happens in Central Asia. It's quite an interesting process. It's always changing process. We see different think tanks which has one contractor or customer or donors. So our center is such a center which does not depend on anybody. During the whole 20 years, we had about 12 donors. We had different fundraising experience and funding, pro-funding. Our organization was one of the first ones which did crowdfunding, which allowed us to publish a book. What I would like to say, what impacts development of think tanks? At different times there was different dynamics of development. Of course, at the beginning we just had analytical centers which were under different institutes, parliament, presidential administration. It was quite interesting period when most of the centers were strategic, so they were abbreviated, NISI, KISI, whatever, so they still exist. But I think some evolutionary changes did occur. And the second thing which I would like to mention is the environment. Media for the think tanks is changing too. And it is dependent on some international situations, national environment, and we can see even the language which can see different trends of the language of the products. So one of the recent ones is like the combat on terrorism and extremism. Very interesting example, because the content of the extremism and terrorism is quite different. I remember international forum, we had representatives from all Central Asian countries except for Turkmenistan, and at the end of the conference there was a question and answer session, and for Khordobaliyev asked, can you, all of you present here, security institutes, express how do you define terrorism? It was quite interesting because there were different definitions provided. If we talk about modern or today current situation, it's an intrigue, because this concept for Central Asia, concept of security concept, has China and Russia impacted this definition, because in Russia the combat in terrorism and extremism has to do with the fighting different Islamic movements, but in China. But if Russia accepts Taliban, how it's going to develop further? Interesting collisions do happen with trends And it's quite interesting to see how analytical centers sort of move between them, so discussions and the closed sort of discussions. And it's very interesting to observe. But as for us, I think
Это есть, да. Да, мы не чувствуем даже, да? Я хочу сказать, что
I would like to say that
хаос исследований это именно в основном социально-политические
so
исследования.
we talk about social economic studies, sociology. We also studied inter-ethnic conflicts. It's one of the biggest studies which we performed in 2010.
Мы когда говорили
It was a high quality studies which we performed,
удовлетворительные исходы,
but we do not have satisfaction because I am absolutely sure that this study would be complete
провести его в нашем узбекском.
whenever we can actually carry it out together with our Uzbek colleagues. It's one of the proposals for this combined sort of work. So we studied different processes in the sphere of security, performed different studies. I will not list them right now. So in 2020, one of the recent studies which we have carried out, it was published. We have we studied the sort of ruptures in Kyrgyzstan, south north, and also Western influence. There were different studies which were carried out, and we're still in the process of working on them. But I think balancing, in spite of all the challenges, political collisions and difficulties, we came to not closing our activity, but we came to the transparency and approach to our work. And I would like to say about two daughter centers which were developed. It's Academy of Civil Enlightenment or Education. It was sponsored by our donors, who became our friends and our donors. And they said, if you are so smart, why, if you have all this knowledge, why do you not share it? And then we organized several trainings, workshops for young people. It caused creation of the Academy of Civil Education. It's an associated member of the School of Political Studies in Strasbourg, Europe. We are the only ones which are associated with this institution. And we are the only ones representing Asia in this institute. Also, another networking forum which has another networking, and it's a great chance to develop different instruments which are developing really well. And based on the studies which we performed, we are publishing this illustrated guidebooks on the development of the civil society in Kyrgyzstan. So it will be ready in several months, we think. That another second sort of branch or daughter company of our daughter organization was created 5 years ago. After the conflict, we actually had an we could have an internship, and we also opened up a new instrument of development. It's a memory studies, memory activities. It's a very interesting instrument which we called it SIMBE, I remember, and through which it is very interesting because it not only includes academic studies but also sort of a block of different activities. So now we are perform research, do field trips. Based on that, we have done a lot of publications. These are the books which reflect sort of closed pages of history we were not aware about for a long time. We publish such a journal or magazine which called "Non My Myth," based on memory studies. It's close to us, so we think there are different narratives of development, or narratives for the events which had happened in terms of everything happening, and we use visual practices. We have 6 interesting professional exhibitions which reflect different aspects of our past. Also, we organize international conferences, and very soon we will have a 3rd international conference. The second one was called
Мы специально называли, это было, дали такое название,
so in order to stir the awakening of the studying or research practices, we think it works really well for us.
We're trying to work with teachers as well, because when we gave an advertisement about this personal stories, we had a lot of inquiries from teachers in schools and universities who don't know how to teach history, how to analyze history. But I'd just like to say that it's a very interesting instrument, and I would recommend it to you, dear colleagues. And it's not just looking at the past, it's the analysis of the past and processing of the past, because we all have a different experience. For example, in Kyrgyzstan, when we talk about the past, we talk primarily about some myths and Khaganate, Kyrgyz Khaganate, for example, Manas, etc., etc. So the Tsar period is considered very cautiously, but it contains a lot of trauma, deportation, repressions that do exist, that we don't talk about. But any society, just like any person, without processing the past cannot move forward. So we are considering this study, anatomy studies, as a very strong instrument of self-perception, self-analysis, and development, and further development. We conduct different studies, including in different areas. What I'd like to say, since everyone's already ready for lunch, but what I'd like to say is that today, when we talk about analytical, think tanks, we're observing the localization of analysis, localization of both in-centers or think tank localization, a country localization, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Kyrgyzstan. We'll look into processes that take place in all throughout the region, and maybe that could be Afghanistan as well. Could be some conservative turnaround that's analyzed all international platforms that has to do with Central Asia and Europe and America. It's a very, very interesting development that's occurring right now. But Central Asia doesn't have such a platform where these things would be analyzed. And I visited several international platforms, and they were not regional. But I would like, and it would be very important to have a regional overview of how it all happens, because inside this conservative layover, there are numerous trends exist, including ideological trends as well, or ideological changes, different changes that most likely have to do with us going back in history. We're also talking about COVID impact on the society, on our society, or everybody's society. There are a lot of relevant trends that are lagging behind in our general reflexive moment toward, for example, climate change. Recently, I visited a forum conducted by my colleagues in Tashkent. Yuxalish, hello from me. And 3 days before we came, there were dust storms. And everyone was saying that that's not good for Tashkent. It's not a norm for Tashkent, and it could be possible in Kazakhstan. But these changes are not just climate. These are the changes of economy, policy, etc. So everything's going to be changing from these trends. It would be nice, and I see that, I know there's very different experience of interaction between different think tanks, and one of them is known to you. It's a Central Asian regional platform. It was called Almaty Club, and here I would like to mention Everton and Altona Bitaleva, who gathered us together at some point, and for a number of years we were working, two experts from different Central Asian countries were working together. It was a very interesting experience, and it could be very educational, because I can say for sure that the first year, maybe more than 1 year, it was setting up communications, really. And we live in one region, however, we have different perceptions about the region. We have different possibilities and capabilities to talk, and different communication problems, political limitations. However, the Almaty Club experience is very interesting. It happened, it did occur, and we had several products dedicated to different subject matters for the Central Asian level. If we talk about today, then I haven't. I'm not familiar. Well, all I know is that there are different interactions, institutional links, specifically for us. We are represented in different research communities and memory studies associations, and what I am trying to focus on, I'm trying to focus on the paradigm, that it's a paradox, but it's easier for us to interact and work with colleagues from Europe, Japan, and US, rather than listening and hearing each other. And maybe today's initiative is about this. And for example, we're seeing an interesting trend in development of the civil society. For example, I always listen to that thinking, are we talking about the same civil society? Are we talking about the same objective? So something different, because yes, the client does matter. And if we talk about a client, then we, our center, or our think tank, once we left the Institute of Strategic Studies, that gave us a lot of, in terms of knowledge, skills, self-confidence, and focus. We're trying to be in parallel with state institutions, and that has its own specifics because of the Kyrgyz society, but that does not mean that we do not work with state institutions. We work with state institutions through international organizations. They hire us if this subject or the topic is more politicized. For example, I'm working as a national consultant for Rosa Isakovna during her presidency, but she hired me independently through foreign institutes. This way or the other, we still work with state authorities and state organizations, which is also very important for us, because, as was mentioned earlier, what's important is the impact of analytics on decision making, political decision making, how this distance is close or short or long, and what effect this work has. I think that we all have this experience. We are ready to share it. We're ready to look forward into the future. And I think this is it for me. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mira. It's very interesting. And please stay online. We're not leaving for lunch yet. Yes, is it ever? Am I talking to myself or Mira? Don't go anywhere. We're not leaving for lunch yet. We still have time, about 15 minutes. But Sogar is gonna facilitate the discussion and summarize the results of our session. But Sogar, over to you.
Thank you, Keisha, and thank you to all the speakers. So I understand we have 15 minutes only. Okay, so I'll try to be quick. So first of all, I would like to thank all the speakers who joined the discussion here without the barriers of, distance and, cultures. So, and this discussion is under the frame of development of think tanks in our region in Central Asia. And one of these initiatives is Innovation for Change think tank that our colleagues and our network is trying to nurture and establish and to move forward with it to provide more analytical outputs and information to the civil society organizations to help them to realize their goals and to promote and lead the social change and social movements. So the first one unique perspective of our think tank is we are not only doing the analytical work or research, we want to do make the analytical findings or information into the action or into the change. So this aspect we are calling can-do tank. And related to that, I want to ask first question from our furthest guest from Latin America. Is she still with us on the internet, on the Zoom? Okay.
Yes, I'm here, Bachelor.
Great. Thank you, Christina. And the first question I want to ask from you, as your organization is pretty much prominent in turning research into the actions and changes, right? So what are the key components or key capacities that think tanks should have in order to transit from the research into the action and to make social changes happen?
Thanks, Sugar, for the question. So I think one of the main characteristics an organization, a think tank, must have is a clear communicational and advocacy strategy to try to promote that the evidence that is generated with the research could be transformed really in promoting, for example, evidence-based decision making in the public sector, in the government, and to try to improve the efficiency of public policy and the orientation of public policies. So I think that it's very important also to work to create the spaces for dialogue and debate, to share disseminate the results of the research, and try to in Grupo Faro, for example, we make research, but we also implement projects in, for example, in sustainable development. So we try to connect our research to the projects we want to implement on the topics we are working. And the other thing, I think it's very important to enhance networking between other organizations or other think tanks, because we will see that we have some similar issues and some similar challenges in other countries. For example, here in Latin America, but my experience in Innovation for Change shows that we have also similar challenges in Asia, in Africa. So it's important to learn those best practices and try to orient our action to those topics. And finally, I just want to put like an example on how we have been working in networking with other think tanks. It has also served to protect certain think tanks from some attacks by private companies or by public sectors that they weren't happy of some research that other think tanks in Latin America have done. So we published, for example, a public statement of support as a network for the think tanks that were attacked. So I think it's very important to work in a network. And today with technology and internet, I think it's easier now to do that. Thanks.
Thank you, Christina. And I repeatedly hearing the word communication and cooperation from the speakers and from your latest answer to the question. So next question on the how think tanks could communicate their research results and information effectively, right? We were discussing about there is an overload of information for the public. And sometimes the populism promotes false information, and we are talking about disinformation and misinformation issues lately. And a couple decades ago, we had lack of information, but now we have so much information we can't understand which one is more reliable and objective one. So I wanted to ask next question from Mr. Dasim Satpayev and Ilmira. how to effectively communicate your analytical work with the stakeholders and especially with the public? What are the key things you need to in mind and do?
Well, thank you very much for questions. I'll answer in Russia if you don't mind, because it will be more comfortable for audience.
It's a very interesting thing because the question about communications within the Central Asian region, it has been raised since the 90s on a regular basis. So every conference that I participated in, where my Central Asian colleagues would be part of, we always talk about that we have to unite, because I agree with my colleague from Kyrgyzstan, we're in a paradox. We know more about what's going on in Russia, in the US, or in France, rather than what's going on in Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, or in Turkmenistan for that matter. And there's a proverb: the close neighbor is better than the remote relative. But it never works here. But the most important thing, and one of the reasons was that up until recently, even elite in Central Asian countries, they did not consider regional self-identification through interaction with each other. Everyone was floating or riding its own boat. That's clearly understood, right? And what we're seeing right now, we're looking at what the changes in Uzbekistan right now. And Uzbekistan is demonstrating a very good trend right now when they're actively working within the regions. We've been looking for that for a long time. So it's the largest country, and currently it starts initiating a lot of projects gradually, and the narrative has changed among the heads and governance of Central Asian countries. They keep repeating that they have to interact, to cooperate in creating hubs, in economy, in creating a unified media holding. I don't know, maybe that will start not within Central Asia, but within the Turkish-speaking groups. For example, in Istanbul, recently there was a meeting where there was an initiative discussed about economic interaction and partnership, or media partnership. Maybe Turkey will join this as well, but I don't think we don't have to have an older brother. Central Asian countries have to initiate this project. As for expert community, let's be frank. On the individual level, experts do communicate. We know well our colleagues. We know people from Kyrgyzstan, from Tajikistan, Turkey Khaliva, for example. There's always been individual interaction. An important question is, how do we take this interaction to the level of some strategic document development that would be perceived by all the elites of the Central Asian countries as a collective product? So that is the most difficult project, because, and you were right in saying that in our countries perceive similar things differently, and the hierarchy of threats is different. For example, for Kazakhstan, the problem of Afghanistan has never been number one, unlike Uzbekistan, for example, where Tajikistan, where a lot of studies were conducted on Afghanistan. In Kazakhstan, we don't even have, well, Sultan Akibekov is probably the only expert on Afghanistan in this country, but now we have subjects again that allow us to combine again, unite. And this is environment, for example. This is this topic that actually pushed it in the corner. We're not going to be able to survive independently. Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan depend on water resources from Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, similarly Turkmenistan. That's a very good base, very good baseline where the governments of our countries and the expert communities can find common subjects. And environment has become an important subject for Kazakhstan, decarbonization, and so on and so forth. And I read Shavkat's statement on COP26 in Glasgow, where all presidents of Central Asian countries participated, and they talked about the climate issues, etc. So we have to find certain common points. Water, energy is going to unite everyone. Extremism and terrorism are also very interesting. Religious identity. The youth is becoming more and more religious. That's also a very interesting trend, and we should investigate that. We should have some research, because religious identity, this is what our Kyrgyz colleague was referring to about identity. In 2019 in Chatterhouse, we had a presentation in London, and I had a chapter about conflict of identity in Kazakhstan. That's a very serious problem. I think we're observing the same problem in other Central Asian countries. So we have common points which we can tackle together. The second thing is financing. I would want to have the government issuing this money, because there will always be attempts to make something, to make some changes. It would be nice to have the sources coming from, to have analytical organizations or think tanks having this financial sources of financing and channels. Which channels are going to be used to present their analytical products at their levels. And what's also very important is how this product should be presented to the public in the countries, in our country, so they know more about our common problems and challenges. So I think that the challenges that the analytical community is faced with are more relevant now with regards to cooperation rather than they were in the 90s. I would like to add, sure. When I look at how the analytical sphere or space develops, we're seeing a lot of new opportunities, including methodologies. For example, 10 years ago, we couldn't use open data. Now, it's possible, and we can use more and more open data sources, different networks, different social media, and the possibility and capabilities of each media and network. When we talk about communications, we not only talk about open communications, and even when when donors want to make sure that, or our customers want to have our analytical product to be completely closed, we're saying no to that now due to security reasons as well.
I would like to give an example. You know, the big study which we made on the inter-ethnic conflict, we were bargaining with donor. We said that before we give them this analytical product, we will make the presentations in international community, government, and so on. So and after that, we'll give them this product, because for us it was very important for our product, into which we invest our strength and time, should remain open and more people can get to know it. I would like to say that we develop different communication strategies in regard to different segments. If we work with decision-making people, it's one type of communication. Absolutely active communication with mass media, we are always open for them. Moreover, I would like to say that we have our own TV program once a week at the channel, which has the whole country coverage. Also radio discussions. So we believe in discussions. So it changes society and think tanks, different institutions. And I would like to also talk about very interesting trend, modern interesting trend. That's researchers from Central Asia and attitude towards Central Asia. Now we can see how academia changing. If, for example, 15, 20 years ago, if you remember, wonderful researchers came and wrote different reports on studies, but now we can see the Central Asian studies, they've grown, they've got educated, they have their own school, and they form this overall picture of Central Asia in separate countries on separate practices. Now I can mention it as a separate sort of media. So we have a discussion club, Salat. Words, you know, so it's an open platform, and we provide it for different researchers. And during the last 2 years, we noticed that a lot of researchers come to us from Central Asia, very famous ones, but they choose our platform to present the results of their work. And at some moment, we were quite puzzled. We started asking them, why not American university? Why not academy? They said, you're independent. And I think that here we can talk about decolonial challenge which we experience and discuss, which caused some changes in our countries, in our reflexive environment, which could be nice subject for discussion in a cross-regional environment. Because, as I mentioned, there is the localization of analytics on the privatization of knowledge, but we have a joint past, joint media, joint territory, joint risks, and we should talk about this too in the context of the changes which exist. Also, it's not pleasing to say too often, but we are subcolonial states, post-colonial states, and this status is still there. It's quite obvious. We have something to discuss. That's true. Thank you. Thank you.
I have a suggestion to Christine in Ecuador. Why don't you invite to Ecuador for the next regional meeting, and we'll go to Ecuador to enjoy your country. А мне сегодня Досум говорил, что создал.
Today, Dosama told me how he created his think tank as a non-government organization, which untied his hands because he's critical of government, you know. So my question is to Babur. You said that you have 50 analytical centers. Are they NGOs or they're commercial organizations? Because that determines their behavior and independency. Thank you for your question. Most of think tanks are state-owned, about 30. We have about 50 think tanks, and most of them are state-owned. Remaining 20, they have both commercial organizations and NGOs too. For example, Center of Strategic Development, where we worked before, it positions itself as a think tank. It's a non-government organization. And also we position ourselves as a think tank and non-government organization. What I wanted to say, there is a trend which we notice now. We see the trend that now it's not it's not too dependent on the form. It can be party funded or state-owned funded. We studied the UK experience, Germany experience, and very often I was asking them, since you're funded, who is funding you? What is your legal form? Honestly speaking, they don't understand really the question. For some of them, it doesn't really matter what was the form, legal form, and who is funding the center, because they are sure in the objectiveness of their studies. For example, think tank of Conservative Party of Great Britain, Pride Blue, they receive big funding through Soros funding, but they don't have problem with that because they are sure they are ready at any time to show transparent sort of information. And every time we meet with them, they just advise, do not look at the funding sources, don't look at the legal form. The main thing is the results of your studies to be objective. If the customer asks for certain result, then you should decline. If customer questions or puts a question, you have to just give an objective answer to the question. Thank you, Mr. Babur, Bekmuratov. And the last question to you, and after that, I will give a chance for the audience just to ask a couple of questions, and then we can actually finish or wrap up our session. So our speakers talk a lot about interaction, how to become partners, how to interact with the think tanks and analytical centers. So I understand that you, to some extent, represent the state sector, government sector. So you said about that you have 50 centers and about 30 of them are state-owned. Can all those centers cover all the demand for the requests from the government, from the state entities? Or if not, is there a platform for the interaction between these centers to gather information and provide this information to government entities, to satisfy their demand for information. If we talk about the quality of these institutions, which are government-owned, are they in compliance with the modern state sort of requirements or and reform processes? No, the answer is no, because for many years the centers were only just confirming. All they were doing, they were just confirming the political course which was vocalized or proposed by the government. There was not even there was no analytics whatsoever. They just were looking for the proof that the decision was right of the government. Now situation has changed, and I can say that there is a great demand from the government, both parliament and government, for different type of analytical studies, documents. That is why the state now is very actively working with non-government organizations and international organizations to more extent. We can see interaction between government entities with international organizations, because they provide high quality information, and a lot of organizations sort of adjusted to the requirements or demands of the government, and very rapidly they provide this necessary information. So when in the past it took them a year to do something, now it takes them 2 or 3 months to provide all the necessary information. They have a certain budget which is directed towards sort of meeting certain demands from the government. That's a very effective approach, but we would love to and we look at this very positively for the analytical centers. Analytical potential and think tanks will grow to such extent that will be able to satisfy all the demands from the government. There are a lot of risks, and we do understand that Central Asia is a zone for the geopolitical interests, and we should have our own strong think tanks. And there is a problem of sort of no. Okay, so now, for example, Kazakhstani and Kyrgyz think tanks, should easily come to Uzbekistan, but we have to present them, make them known. And we see this as an area of cooperation. That's why do we talk about the regional approach? We should share expert reviews, share results, because Kazakhstan has its experience, and it would be very useful for Uzbekistan. Unfortunately, we are pressed for time, Kaisha. So because of the break, we are a little bit late. We will be late for lunch. Let's thank our speakers. During lunchtime, you have a chance to talk, to discuss. Thank you very much for a wonderful session. Thank you to moderate together with me. Thank you very much. And we give the word